tricks that I know. I'm getting tired of talking, and I need more of a show right now. It's time that you made your mind up, 'cause lately all it ever does is change. Feels like we're only talking, going round and around, back around. I will fight like no other every day. I won't stop like the others. I will stay. 'Cause now is the right time. And I'm feeling alright. I'm playing your game like I know I can win right now. You got me on tonight, 'cause loving you is like I'm walking a tightrope so high. I won't be turning around. No, I won't be turning around. It's the right time. You feeling alright? I'm playing your game like I will win tonight. I think I'll do it on my way. I'm gonna show you what I'm going through. Get you out of your comfort zone. 'Cause I need more of the truth right now. It's time that you made your mind up. 'Cause lately all it ever does is change. Feels like we're only talking, going round and around, back around. I will fight like no other every day. I won't stop like the others. I will stay. 'Cause now is the right time. And I'm feeling alright. I'm playing your game like I know I can win right now. You got me on tonight, 'cause loving you is like I'm walking a tightrope so high. I won't be turning around. No, I won't be turning around. It's the right time. You feeling alright? I'm playing your game like I will win tonight. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. We'll turn this around. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. We'll turn this around.
Hey everybody, welcome to Drones and Tech on Geeksvana Live. It's great to see you all. Thank you so much for coming out on this this cold evening. Well, it is cold in the UK anyway. To join us for our live show this evening. As you may know from the trailer we played out earlier in the week, we are joined by a very special guest this week, Austin Choi-Fitzpatrick, author of The Good Drone. And we're going to have a slightly different conversation. We're not going to be talking how high you should fly your drone and how many batteries you should fit to an FPV drone and blah blah blah. We're actually going to be talking more about the politic, the societal impact that drones have, and having a wider conversation. So I'm really looking forward to this one, and I hope you guys are as well. Great to see the usual crowd in the chat, including our channel members. Andy Keast, hello sir, good to see you. Welsh Rob, Ian, hello sir. Lone Star UAV, howdy. Good to see you, sir. Washington County News Station, Utah. Hello, sir. Drone Shots. Always good to see you, sir. Simon Hawkins. Hi. That was our prize winner from last week's show, actually. Good to see you, sir. So before we go across and join my co-host, Stephen Sutton, who I should probably mention is the co-host this evening. Sorry, Stephen. He's in the background in my ears. Just going to play you a very quick introduction video for those that didn't see the trailer, which explains a little bit more about why we've asked Austin along.
I'm the most concerned that we are going to lose opportunities to use technology for good as citizens, and that public policies will be passed that will actually thwart that. This book is really about what I think is an overlooked set of technologies, some of them new and some of them old, that are in the air. So there's drones, satellites, and even balloons and kites, which have a much older history. And I'm trying to ask in the book, what is having all of this new stuff in the air and having them flown by anybody who wants to fly them do for politics? So how does new technology in the air change politics on the ground? The striking thing to me, and I think to the team of graduate students I was working with, was how often people were using this technology for good and how rarely they were using it for nefarious purposes. The smallest sort of usages that we could track were criminality and spying. So the thing that everybody's worried about, what if drones are going to be used to drop drugs into prisons? True. What if they're going to be used to spy on me? Could happen. But in fact, those usages were the smallest sort of occurrences when we looked at thousands and thousands of cases. But there's this whole other body of activity that's happening where everyday people like me are out there using drones for the greater good, environmental advocacy, civil rights advocacy, and this sort of thing. It's actually important for what kind of democracy we want to have and how we want to use technology for accountability and transparency. Now is a great time to be talking about how to hold the powerful to account at our local level, at the national level, at the international level. And I think that's one of the invitations that technology holds for us. It also holds some other perils, right? But I want to focus on that opportunity for accountability, transparency, and larger conversations about what makes for good society that leads to human flourishing.
Okay. Here we are with Stephen Sutton. Stephen, how are you, sir? Of the Flyby Guys.
I'm fine. How are you? I'm looking dark because my lights are dimming here. So
just so the chat knows why I was hesitating. Then we were just having an off-camera conversation while the video was playing, where I said, "Oh, the first thing I spotted about this video was there was a dog in the background." To which Austin, hi Austin.
Hey, how's it going? There's no dog in the background.
Said, what dog? And then Stephen said, "I don't see a dog." So I think I've just had a Mandela effect moment. Of my very own, which is slightly embarrassing, but there we go. And I thought I would share that with you, my loving audience. So yes, there we go. So Austin, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day.
I'm so glad to be here, and I'm especially glad, I was saying this in the chat, that I was watching the video. Having a beard means that sometimes my beard gets longer and shorter. So it's always nice to see a video where my beard is the same length as me in the moment I'm speaking. So I'm glad that took a lot of planning to do.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate y'all working with me on that.
A lot of strategy.
Anyway, happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And yes, your beard game is actually the number one thing which was commented on to everybody that I know personally that I sent a link to. And it was, oh my God, the beard game. Sorry.
So if you lose listeners, we'll know why. If folks didn't show up. My apologies. I'll come back shaved next time. I'm so sorry.
No, the beard ratio is just about right on the show this evening, actually. So on the other Thursday, I co-host with a young lady, and so the beard ratio is one less there most weeks.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lib. So as I was saying, tonight we're going to be talking with Austin Choi-Fitzpatrick, who is the author of the book The Good Drone, which is a book I would highly recommend. And in fact, yes, Stephen has his copy to hand. There we go, almost as if queued up. And it is a fascinating read because it does look at the angle of drones from multiple angles, more angles than I was expecting, actually. And when I'm looking at drones and when I'm looking at the world of drones, so everything from the commercial use all the way down to hobby flight and even children flying toys and building toy drones, there are so many wider conversations that need to happen there. Could you briefly explain, in your own words, what the Good Drone is about? Yeah,
so the Good Drone came out of this experience, which I'm happy to talk about now, or maybe we'll get to it later, of me as a geek. Nice. I saw, this is back a couple of years ago when the Phantom first got released, and I thought, that's interesting. That's got to mean something. And this is going to, maybe change the way we think about some things. I'm an academic, I'm a sociologist, I work on social movements and that sort of thing. But I wasn't thinking about the broader philosophical implications, which maybe we'll touch on in a little bit. I just thought, that's cool. I wonder what we can do with it. I bought one for a class that I was teaching, and we started playing around with the technology. And then I did this thing that academics do, or paid to do, and need to do, which is to write academic articles. And I thought, I'm going to write a quick, fast little academic article about how my class and I use this technology. And this is like really this is like TMI, but what you do in my world is you go to the library, you dig through an archive, and you say, like, what else has been published on this? And then you reference it and say, essentially, look, I'm working in this particular tradition. I'm asking and answering questions that other people like me are interested in. And when I sat down to do that digging, and I started to dig for who else was thinking and talking about drones in the way that I was thinking and talking about them, which is like with the social purpose and for a greater good, and yes, not just as like a plug-in for industry, but as a sort of maybe a game changer for society, let's say. I found nothing. Then I was like, okay, maybe I'm being too ambitious and I'm looking for people who are doing, things that are a little too cool. And I still found nothing. So what got me into this was not an academic interest. It was me, like I think a lot of your listeners, thinking this is cool technology, wanting to know more about it, and then taking it home to my home community, which is academics, and saying, guys, you want to talk about this? Crickets. Nobody, like, again, there's nobody else having this conversation. So I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to write a little article that said, oh, P.S., I did this thing. And it turns out that in the world I live in, which is people thinking about politics, society, innovation, there was not a conversation about what drones meant, what their adoption might mean for society, things I talk about in the book, who might use them, who might hate them, what could go right, what could go wrong. That just wasn't a conversation. And the only community I found, and I'll stop with this, the only community I found was folks who said, oh, drones, we knew about them. And they meant predators and predators and, their fixed wing.
Yes, absolutely.
Fixed wing aircraft.
Yes, indeed.
So they were willing to talk to me, but that wasn't my community, right? So the book got written because I wanted to have a conversation like this one, and I didn't know who to have it with, and so that's where the book came from, I guess.
It was quite interesting how you started in the book, and in the history of the predator and where it came from. That was interesting. I didn't know that, and that
was this interesting thing that happened. I'm in Southern California. I work in the US and the UK, and I live most of the time in Southern California. And I knew that Abe Karem, who invented the Predator and the drone that predated it, I knew that he lived and had he's older now. He's in his 80s, and he lives in a couple of hours from me. So I wanted to go interview him, and sure enough, I did. Was able to talk to him. We had this whole conversation. It was a great conversation. And the thing that was striking to me, Stephen, I just think I'm just making your point, is that he said, I never intended for this thing to be weaponized. Yeah. It was actually used together with the CIA in a sort of humanitarian mode in 99, 2000 during the sort of conflicts in the Balkans, because we think the Serbs were killing people and burying them by night. We thought it was a human rights sort of effort. Yeah. So they used this to get under the cloud cover, which satellites couldn't do. And so I said, oh, so you wouldn't have equipped it? And he said, no, I didn't say that either. So it was interesting to see this early story where even what we think of as the quintessential military side of the house didn't start out that way. And I'm not trying to say, it went the right way or the wrong way. I just think that it was like a very different version of things. If you ask, what were you thinking at that moment in 97, 98, 99, different story comes out.
Indeed.
But as you said in the book as well, the war would actually have went on longer if that hadn't been developed. So it actually cut the war.
And it served this larger human rights objective. And again, I'm like a human rights, social movements, politics, and society guy. So that caught my attention. I was there to talk to him because he invented, this incredibly transformative technology. But in the conversation, that's what caught my ear, because I thought, oh, wow, this is a untold story of how this technology got its start. Yeah.
Yeah, no, indeed. And there is a, I'm not sure it's necessarily an irony, but I find it fascinating that we've gone from the large scale predator drone being the very much what most of the public would know as a drone, and we've almost come sort of almost not full circle, but all the way back down to, in fact, now governments are looking at much smaller drones, which we would recognise as drones, to be doing things like surveillance and even drone swarm technology and that type of thing. So the uses and the uses which are just around the corner for drones as well, it fascinates me from a government point of view. I say fascinates, also scares me, of course, because it is a changing landscape.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how your listeners and members of this community feel about this, but I'm on the more libertarian, don't want the government spying on me side of the spectrum. But I feel like there's this little moment. I hadn't thought about that, Sean, until you mentioned it in this way. There's this little moment where nobody thought to care about this technology, and it had a little moment where it was for people who wanted to do cool and interesting things. And then and industry picks up on it. That's fine. That's created new jobs. That's great. I don't mind that at all. But I think I'm with you now. If all of a sudden, it's cheaper to send 5 drones around to my place than it is to send an an officer of the law. I'd rather have nobody show up at my house.
Yes,
but if it's got to be somebody, I'd rather somebody I'm making eye contact with, out my front door, and not me wondering who that is in my backyard. And I feel like that's like, this is a small digression, but in the book, I talk about balloons, like other ways of getting cameras in the air and that sort of thing. And there's this moment where balloons were, the military industry, everybody was like, how can we use these to, national security, for profit? And they couldn't figure out any way to do it. Sorry, my phone's going off. I should have turned that off. And they could find out no way to do it. So they dropped them. And balloons were like a hobbyist and inventor thing. Then industry got involved and industry disappeared. And they went back to being a hobbyist sort of thing. And so I'm glad there's a market now, that's scaling for drones in industry, but it makes me nervous that a lot of that technology cross-pollinates with the government. I know maybe not all listeners agree with me, but that's my reflection.
I mean, it's you look at one of the more innovative recent brands of Skydio, and of course their main product. To me, that I don't really see them as a drone company. I see them as an AI company, because their AI is amazing and can do fantastic things. And I wouldn't be surprised if one day one of the very large tech company buys them up just for that AI, frankly. But it concerned me when I heard about sort of government contracts, federal contracts, that type of thing for their drones and their AI to be used. And it was almost seen in our industry, in the YouTube industry, drone industry, as a positive that, oh great, it's a new contract, but it's actually, what can that AI do? And then when they're asked direct questions, were your drones used in the Black Lives Matters protest to monitor people? No one will tell you, and that starts to put a slightly different shade on it for me, from the point of view that these wonderful things which are a fantastic hobby to us are a way of earning money for people like Stephen, can suddenly be turned around into something which is going to surveil us. And there is, I'm a very optimistic person, extremely optimistic. It's probably too optimistic sometimes, but that sometimes the skeptic creeps in when I look at the amount of drone regulation that comes in, and what that drone regulation specifically stops you doing. And then you wonder why some governments seem to almost not want us to have our drones, as it were, and have freedom with those drones.
That was I have to say, this reminds me, and I'm not as we were talking earlier, I'm not a policy expert, but this is one thing when we sat down to actually the data that goes into this book, we analyzed, scraped the web and got all this data about how folks were using drones, sort of non-weaponized small platform, usually quadcopters, but smaller platforms, UAVs and UASs. And one of the first thing that shocked us was that the number of times that people were statistically, like the smallest usages, the almost invisible usages, were for privacy invasion and for crime. And so what we found out that 1,000, a quadcopter dropping heroin over a prison facility got syndicated in every major daily newspaper, but it was like one or two times, and then they found that the criminals stopped doing it, or it was actually a small and persistent problem, but small relative to all the other positive uses. So that was a big thing that came out of this data, was most people were using this technology in a way that was positive. And then on the other side of the coin, then you ask, well, how is it getting regulated? And one of the things I was most concerned about is that I was living in Hungary at the time. And, I start this book out with a story about how we used a drone to document a protest.
Yes,
we can talk more about that if you all want to.
Yes, please.
So essentially there was a tax. I'll finish that statement and then tell the story. So I was concerned because essentially, if governments are going to restrict hobbyist use, then it also restricts the kind of use that has an eye toward government accountability, toward documenting, fraud, corruption, these sorts of things that are kind of persistent problems in countries around the world. And then who gets drones? And if it's nobody, then I guess we're at the old status quo. But if that technology, especially, I guess, more fully realized using AI and layered onto other forms of data that governments have, and then the government gets it, then that makes me nervous. And so one of the things I was hoping to convince folks in the book is that, we're not going to put this genie back in the bottle. And we can think of it as an arms race if you'd like, but it shouldn't be Amazon and I'm calling, speaking to you from America, it shouldn't be Amazon and Homeland Security that has drones and nobody else does. That makes me really nervous.
Yes.
So I think I'm just making, again, like Sean, the point you were making is that you've got to find a way to balance these things and not innovate our way right into restrictive legislation. And I got I got questions from, colleagues of mine from the human rights world on the left who are like, we need regulation. We need to regulate these things. And I was in the strange position where I was saying, well, actually, let's just wait and see. And they're like, wait for what? And, off the record, although this is on YouTube, I was like, well, let's wait to see what the real problem is. And in some ways that says, let's wait to see, you wait to see what the problem is means you wait until there is a problem, which means you're kind of allowing a problem to happen. But on the other side, we then pass policies and make regulations and legislation that respond to real problems and not, nightmare scenarios and the things we can dream up and imagine fearing. And in the early days, you all were there's a lot of folks saying, oh my goodness, you could do all sorts of things with that.
Yes.
Well, for every 410 or 12 gauge or AK-47 or AR-15 strapped onto an octocopter, nobody's getting shot with them, knock on wood. But it's like, that's not a prevalent usage. The fact that people can do it doesn't mean they are. And that points me back to, and I'll finish here, to this data that we gathered that said a lot of things you can do with this technology, but the thing people fear most is actually the thing that, if you look at the data, people are doing the least of, which is being mean and hurtful to each other. And at the end of the day, I think we're like, maybe you were optimists, I guess you and I, Sean, like people are good and that's not what they're going to do. So let's not make laws about that stuff that hurts people who are either opening new sectors of the economy or, like we were doing in Budapest, I'll tell that story a bit later, then like holding the powerful to account when they're not doing, following the will of the people.
No, exactly. And I think that's where the disconnect with the hobby starts to kick in with authorities and regulators, because they tell us they're making us safer, they tell us that they're making us more accountable, etc. And those of us drone flyers who want to be responsible and we are law-abiding citizens, we hear that and we say, okay, of course, I'm going to adhere to the new laws. But then you when people are saying something about safety and you have a hobby that has one fatality in something like 30 years, and that was actually a model helicopter rather than a quadcopter, was one of the 3D helicopters, which are extremely powerful. You start to worry about what's behind that policy and what's behind that thought process, which is why, to me, your book and the concept of it really does speak volumes, because I think we do have to have that conversation about all technology, frankly, and we need to try and keep it as free as possible, in my opinion.
I agree, and that's hard because I mean, this is not about now. Like, I'm going to say something that's not about technology at all, but getting the public involved in these things is complicated, and that's why I think, one of the reasons I wrote this book, kind of for a broader audience, I hope, and I'm so happy to be talking with y'all, is that like more people need to be thinking about this beyond the sort of like experts in the field, because like here in the US, the FAA opens up their commentary period, and then we need people with the right information to be feeding into that policy process and saying things other than, dear Lord, I hope this thing doesn't, and then insert fear here. Not because that fear is, people shouldn't have fears, but because we need to like have public opinion that's founded on the best, science, and empirical evidence and stuff that we know to the best of our knowledge. And it can change, and maybe around the corner from, a whole bunch of mean people doing bad things. But so far, that's not what we're seeing. And I'd like I'm just repeating myself now, but I'd like to see policy that reflects that.
No, I agree. And it is worth repeating. We have taken one slight corner, turned one slightly positive corner in the UK in particular. One of the companies, Crowded Space Drones, who actually we've had on the channel a few times, they are a specialist company at public safety, and they're basically able to now sit at an event or a sensitive area and monitor about a 20-mile radius. And they're able to identify if it's a drone and the height it's at, where the pilot is. So they're able to then, if there is something happening or they're worried about that, they can send an officer, a police officer, or security, depending on the event, down to that person to have a chat with them. And to me, that seems like a better way round almost of handling the issue, because then the one or two rogue pilots that you get are going to get mopped up quite nicely by that kind of security. Because my issue with regulation sometimes is that it doesn't deal with the rogue pilot anyway, because a rogue pilot, if they want to do something naughty, they're going to code break their software, etc. And it's going to be something that they're going to find a way to do anyway. Hence why we've still got, despite the fact that most prisons are geo-fenced, on things like DJI drones, you still have DJI drones being found by officers carrying out that work, because of course people will hack that drone to have it do that. So the Budapest story, this is a real drones for good example, and I think it's one which highlights a lot of the, I don't want to say ethos behind your book, but certainly a lot of the driving force behind why we need to protect drones, and need to, as you say, ensure we have use of them as well as government.
Yeah, so I mentioned a little while ago that I bought this drone just as a, as a hobbyist and the kind of person, an early adopter kind of person. And the class that I launched it in was a human rights class. And the way that you teach a human rights class, if you live in my world, is you figure out you help students learn how to write policy memos and write strong letters to the editor, basically. And that's good. It's important. I'm not trying to, I guess I'm mocking my colleagues. I don't mean to mock my colleagues, but that's good. And I thought, we can do something a little bit more edgier and more interesting. And I've always been interested in new tech. And I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we buy a drone and we'll innovate around the estimation of crowd sizes? Because it turns out in the world that I live in, people protesting for or against a particular policy, people who want to see a change happen or want to stop a change from happening on the left or the right, social movements, getting your people out onto the street to make their voices heard, or getting them all together in a petition, or having a tweet storm, or doxing people, whatever, whether it's like, tried and true traditional methods, people showing up on the street, or new unconventional and illegal methods like doxing. People are work together to bring change. And we've been doing this for a couple of hundred years, starting in Europe about 200 years ago. Let's go, what do we want? Well, let's go ask the parliament and we'll tell them what we want. This is like an old school thing. So I thought what the puzzle here oftentimes is that protesters say there were 1 million people there. America's famous for having 1 million person marches, and there are never 1 million people. And we know they're not 1 million people because the state, because the troopers, sort of state troopers, the park rangers, they go out and they count, and they have this onesie, they're kind of like 1, 2, 3. And they have this, kind of old school way of counting folks. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we had some kind of, better way of doing this? And then the Phantom 2 was released, and I thought, aha, perfect price point. We'll buy this for the class. So I bought it for the class. I didn't tell my boss. And I thought, we'll use this thing to estimate, protest sizes, and we'll see if we can improve on essentially this public service, which is, the press is the one that tries to guess. The police try to guess. The protesters don't pretend to try to guess. They tell you what they think it was. And so then you're trying to discern, did the cops really know? Maybe they want it to be smaller. Do the protesters really know? Maybe they want it to be bigger. Does the person from the media or the press person know the best intentions, but they might just be eyeballing it? So anyway, we thought, we get a camera in the air. We're going to do a great job of estimating all of this. Perfect thing for a drone, right? So we bought it. We developed this estimation method, which, would bore you all to tears if I described it to you. But we developed this method, and then we sat around and we waited for a protest. And it turns out that Budapest, Hungary is a bad place. There's no protest. There were just, a handful of people here, 8 people. What do we want? 9 people. When do we want it? Just not a lot of protests. And so we hung tight, and serendipitously, lucky us, the government, this increasingly authoritarian and autocratic government, which has its own problems and is its own side story, decided to tax the internet. And it was a gigabyte, is a euro per gigabyte tax. Wow. And that would have essentially affected big businesses, which consume lots of gigabytes for their, lots of bandwidth for their firm folks. It would have affected pensioners who are just paying have just one little plan. Absolutely. It would have affected college students. So essentially what it did is this policy alienated pensioners and hippies and big business. Everybody was upset, and lots of people turned out on the street. And so perfect timing, we've already got this geeky thing already dialed in for estimating crowd sizes. So we ended up deploying the drone, sort of in the proximity of these crowds, and getting this angle at which we could estimate how many people were there. And we ended up developing this estimate. We released the estimate, and our estimate was wildly different from the government's estimate. No surprise. The government said it was those same 8 or 9 people, same old cranks and anarchists, the same sort of concerned voices that are always out. And we were able to show that actually, no, it was, it was pensioners, and it was people, parents with their strollers, and the people that the government said were out, and it was all of their, like their aunties and their grandmas as well. And so we did this with an independent journalism outfit that then released the video, put a soundtrack on it, put it on Vimeo, and it went sort of like relatively viral. It got, got seen by, 20, 30,000 people in that first like 24, 36 hour period, which is a lot of people in that context. And something like, that there's 2 protests in a row. And then very quickly after the second protest, it became clear that something like 60,000 people had turned out, which in that context is a lot of people.
Yes.
The government folded, and they folded, and the policy wasn't a left-right policy. It was just, wasn't a common sense policy, and it got shut down by the people. And the government said that it didn't get shut down by the people. And our video showed, said that was wrong. And our estimation method was able to show that the number of people was actually significant. So you've got this visual representation with the video, and then also this estimation. So that was great. And then that, the footage that got, there's this whole process where we flew over not over the crowd, but like near the crowd. And then they pointed their cell phones up at us. And there happened to be a photographer from the New York Times who was right there, who took a picture of like everybody pointing their, their lit phones, concerts, Bon Jovi concert style at the drone. And then that made the cover of the International New York Times. And so that embarrassed the government, and the government said, okay, we're not going to pass the law. And everybody said, yay. And then 6 weeks later, we got a phone call, which was like, we'd like to invite you to the government aligned university campus for a conference about drone regulation, and I'm like, oh dear, it's me and my graduate student. He went on to work for DJI after that, but it's me and my graduate student who, bless him, I want him to get a degree, and so we showed up, and I asked around, I said, is this really a conference, or is this, is this the police, or what are we going to do? And sure enough, it was a conference. And what they wanted to do is consult civil society and consult academics and, and get a full range of perspectives on the law that they were going to pass that was going to ground all, deployment of UASs in the proximity of security operations, right? Police, state security operations, which if on the face of it is the right thing. We don't, I live in a place that's got, fires in Southern California, and we've got, fire people are out there putting out fires, and idiots are flying their drones
very
over, and they
important
shouldn't be doing
reasons to keep those skies clear. Absolutely.
Yes. So so I'm fully on board with that. But so no problem there. But if every single protest has to have a permit, and with the permit come the police, then it means you can't document ever again in an embarrassing way large anti-authoritarian public policy protest. So that story has this 2 edges to it, and I'll finish here. It was the great potential. It turns out that we were able to, I think, had an anti-business and anti-people and anti-intranet law got struck down. Would have been bad for business and bad for civil society. But on the other hand, it woke the government up to the fact that this was not dangerous. This wasn't a dangerous technology because it was going to hurt anybody, but it was a dangerous technology, not physically, but politically, because it could embarrass them and create consequences and costs in the political arena. And that's when they passed the law. And so I'm in favor of the physical safety side of the law, but I'm ever since then, and that story kind of stuck, so that's like the aha moment where I realized there's potential in this technology and risk, but there's also this other political story about what having new technology in the air means for politics on the ground that I think we need to take really seriously. And you can't just, that doesn't come with the kit, if you buy if you buy a new drone, that sort of set of implications and thinking doesn't come with the kit. So I know that's a little bit more sort of atmospheric and philosophical, but that political which is experience led me to wonder, okay, so what's happening here when it comes to the politics and society as well?
Yeah. And I think it's important that, whilst we enjoy our little DJI drones and we try to fly them in as many places as we're possibly legally allowed to do, it is important to see the wider impacts. And I find the Hungary story fascinating because it does show both sides of the coin. It does show regulation changing things, and
but it's the positive side as well.
yeah, I
It's
mean, one
also
drone,
the positive
the
side.
difference one drone can make to a national policy, which is, as you say, clearly most people would agree that that's wrong. You know, taxing the internet is possibly one of the worst things I've ever heard.
How,
yes.
actually, Austin, how do you view, you know, what was I going to say? How society accepts drones. I mean, if we think about how obviously governments feel, but how do you see social acceptance for drones?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was writing the book, I kept trying to pin down like the best and most recent public opinion data, and it's just been changing. You know, it's just been changing and changing because new technology just has an adoption curve that takes people time. And I think that curve is predicated on familiarity, which is predicated on penetration. So basically what I mean by that is the more drones are in the air, the more people get used to them, the more they say, well, that's the fifth time I've seen that annoying thing, but it hasn't spied on me once, whatever that looks like. And something that looks like an early response to a pollster, which was like, what, where? No. And then the pollster writes down, no. It turns into something that's a little bit more like begrudging acceptance. And then I've got 2 kids, my kids think these things are normal. And then, sooner than a generation, but over time, it just enters the lexicon. So we see this, not the lexicon, but, it becomes part of the normal sort of world that we live in. This is true for bicycles. This is true for automobiles, for locomotives, public opinion comes around, and I think there's no putting the genie back in the bottle in terms of innovation, and people adapt and adopt. So the question then in my mind is, okay, so when do we reach something like stability or status quo, or these numbers were changing as I was writing the book. It was 87% against, and it was 45% are like, oh, I guess. And if I'd written the book, finishing the book right now, the number would be different yet again. But I think it will, like all technologies, head in a persistently positive direction where people there'll still be some holdouts. But I think it's predicated on exposure. And I really have been surprised, I have to say, over the last 10 years, I've not been surprised to see adoption by industry, but I have thought that there would be more uptake in communities I'm familiar with. I work with activists and protesters and human rights groups, and most of them still are asking the question they were asking me 5 years ago, which is what would I use that for? And I've answered the question, but folks are still no, I don't think that sounds like us. Once we get over that, more folks will use it. And when it gets seen, then more folks will be like, oh yeah, that's right. And until then, I think we're gonna have the slow and steady move toward acceptance.
But I think that's the same in many industries, because when we look at how drones are being used, if you look at software, if we forget drones themselves and look at the software that can be used with drones, that can help industries, that can help many sides of industries. And yet there are many large corporations that are not using drones, that are not using this software that can help them. I've seen, I don't know if I can say who this is, but there's certainly one large company that has now recently dropped an amazing piece of software, and they're not even going to sell it. They're actually dropping the software. And it makes no sense, because this software is absolutely fantastic. It's nothing to do with the drone itself, it's the software. But I think that somehow that there are many software companies out there that have great imagination, much like yourself, thinking about the future and thinking about what can be done. But there's not much adoption. Adoption seems to be rather slow, and that's very frustrating. Thinking of where we are right now, thinking of what I do for a living and how I use software. And how I know that I can help, but it's very, very frustrating.
I share that frustration. I really do think that one of the things I thought on the other end of that experience I described, and before I wrote the book, was that this would be the beginning of a lot of uptake for organizations that are trying to do stuff similar to what I just described, or would use this technology for advocacy purposes, or for, there's this, I think Danny Miller is his name. I'm going to be embarrassed if I've got it wrong, but he does this great work showing inequality in Cape Town and in other places where there's, you know, sort of wealthy communities right next to impoverished communities, and it's not new, but seeing it from the air, it has this like kind of oh shoot moment where you see, you know, you're able to see something, you know, from a public policy
Absolutely.
or from the, you know, ripped from the headline sort of perspective, but it feels more visceral. I expected to see more of that, and I'm excited by what I see. So I said in the book, at the end of the book, I said, I think that diffusion, like, you know, adoption is predicated on people looking at the technology, thinking they can afford it, thinking it's the kind of thing that works for people like them, and it will help them do something that they need to do. I use clunkier language in the book, but that's the argument. Yeah. And so far, it's the price point hasn't changed, hasn't gotten suddenly more expensive. The technology's only gotten better, you know, bang for your buck.
Absolutely.
But then in terms, I think there's something cultural and social, and that's where I've sort of that's my thinking right now. Yeah. And I think it's that last thing where folks look at it and think that's what people like me use, excuse me, to do stuff that people like me do. And I just don't think for some reason it's moved as easily as cell phones. You know, cell phones a long time ago, people were like, why would I want to carry my phone around with me?
That's right.
Well, put a phone in somebody's hand and everybody knows the answer. Why would I ever use a drone? Put a drone in people's hands and like, excuse me, not as many people as I think should know the answer. I'm just a cough, sorry.
That's okay, no problem at all. You know,
again, sorry, I'll just follow actually up on that. But again, this is following back on a lot of people focus on the drone. They focus on the drone being the tool. When you know, I see the drone as like a screwdriver. I see it like, you know, when you have someone coming to fix your home, you don't ask the person, what kind of screwdriver are you using? You know, it's really, you know, it's the applications that we can use with drones that makes what we do, that can shape society, that can shape human rights, that can shape any new industry, you know. And it's not about the drone itself, but it's about the software. And I think this is where a lot of people tend to lose focus, because they always ask, what kind of drone are you using? I mean, to me, it's, you know, if someone asks that, it's like, you know, it's you know, if I'm talking with a company and asking about, you know, if they want me to do, I always ask the software. It's this, you know, what software are you using? You know, so.
Absolutely, no, indeed, I can completely see that. Austin, one of the on my channel, I covered very different subjects in the videos, everything from regulation videos to news stories, and it's all pretty much drone focused. There's a bit of tech thrown in there as well, but obviously drone is tech, but most of it is very much drone focused. One of the things which I suffer with is a slightly moving pendulum swing from the point of view of protest within the drone community, and how we stop things that we're not happy with from a regulation point of view, and, you know, keep what we feel are freedoms. Some people in our hobby have been carrying out their hobby for decades, since they were a young child, building their own drones, model aircraft, and then moving into drones, etc. And there's very much a growing part of our community who feel that non-compliance is a feasible way of protesting regulations that the drone community as a whole don't like, whatever that specific policy may be. My fear always is, from an individual point of view, that I worry about people from the point of view, I don't want someone to go out and be arrested and get a criminal record and lose their job and, you know, not be able to pay their mortgage and that type of thing. So I always think from that point of view. What are your thoughts from the point of view of non-compliance from a wider society point of view as a form of protest?
I have never been asked that question before. It's a great question. And I've always thought about the use of drones in the way I just described them earlier, as in support of, you know, sort of advocacy efforts, or to hold the powerful to account. Absolutely. And that sort of thing. I had not thought about essentially what this would mean from that perspective. So I have some thoughts, but they're sort of off the cuff. I think that the bigger question in my mind when it comes to civil disobedience, which is a sort of outer form of the range of tactics you've just described.
Absolutely.
When it comes to civil disobedience, I think that, I mean, I'm a kind of a, classic American in some ways, and I think like if the laws don't work for the people, then there's a problem with the law and not with the people. And that's the sort of, we've been doing this for 200 and some odd years, you all may know. And so this is, it leads to some weird idiosyncrasies and some significant problems, but that's the sort of the animating spirit. I have to just admit out front that that's where I'd be coming from. The question then becomes, what's the desired end state? And what are the processes for getting there? And so just thinking from a social movements perspective, the real question is, if a particular policy is the problem, what's the way to address that policy? And some forms of non-compliance are not really politically any better than just the equivalent of acting out, and create risks, reputational risks for the community,
yes,
but also actual economic or even legal risks for the individual who's doing that action. So that's sort of one version of this is nobody's going to tell me to, I'm gonna. And I'm saying I recognize that, that's the world I was born into. So I get that. But the larger question is, if one wants to take a critique of a law that's unjust and then actually do something about it, like changing the law, for example, or getting new laws passed, or securing from whoever enforces the law an agreement that they will not enforce the law, that requires something more than just I ain't gonna. And that usually requires solidarity, collective action, knowing like multiple stakeholders, knowing who the regulators are, and knowing somebody on the inside who's sympathetic, having a reasonable alternative, having some form of compelling pressure. And so I can go on like that for a while because I'm a professor and I get paid to just, talk and talk. But the punchline is that at the end of the day, those particular kind of acts are maybe a speech act, or well, they heard me now. But if it actually comes to moving the needle on policy that matters, not just in that one case, but for others, it requires identifying the larger systems that one wants to change, and then an actual strategy with tactics inside of it that help lead toward that objective. So then doing something like a petition, or something like an embarrass a politician campaign, or something like that, which has nothing to do with technology, or this technology in particular, is just how political pressure works. Yeah. That may end up being more effective than sort of a strategic particular form of civil disobedience, if that makes any sense. Now, if you all say we need a test case because we're going to take this to court and somebody's got to go to jail for us, and I say it'll be me, and then we get it all lined up. This is how, this is an American style of doing things. And we all pool our money. We got the bail for me, and I break the law. And then 20 minutes later, Stephen submits the lawsuit, Sean's the lawyer, and then we take the FAA to court. That's not bad. But then me saying, you can't tell me, is not me acting out. It's me specifically pulling the one linchpin out of a chain of events that was strategically decided on in advance with a theory of change that has alternatives and a process and all of that. So that was a long-winded answer, but I think that the question is, what does success look like, and what does one really want?
Yes, no, indeed, because one of my fears is that is, and it is something that a few of the influencers within the drone community who have large audiences, they do often say, well, for instance, drone registration shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be paying for it. Just don't do it. And my problem there is in my mind, we're almost handing, without it being organized, we're almost handing the authorities that don't want us to have drones a reason, because then next year they get to arrest 300 drone pilots who weren't registered, and they get to say, see, we told you these people are bad. Rather than it being, there's all these people, and because unfortunately those individual statements will never be read out in the press that, I was doing it because I don't agree with drone registration, and of course it's easy for a criminal to say, I burgled that house because I don't agree with other people owning things that I don't have. It becomes a story after their explanation becomes a story after the act, and it's a fascinating area to me, because sometimes I do swing a little bit more to the non-compliance route, but I always come back around, because I do think of the individual human factors and the individual issues that it would have on people, which is never a good thing. Never a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think that this is the challenge then becomes if we say we, who we're talking about. So I'm looking at the chat. Treetop Flyer says, hint, privileged white guys don't organize. So then the question is, if we actually have enough individual, I say like we as white guys, I'm speaking for myself as a white guy, if I have enough individual privilege that can protect me when the police show up, or I already have a lawyer, or I am a lawyer and I don't give a damn, then I can act out and not have to worry about like the larger collective implications, like as you're flagging, Sean, for the community. Yes. So I think this point, I'm just echoing, I think, or riffing off of this point by Treetop Flyer. The question in my mind is, to what extent is there a sense of community that feels like they, we, it is in it together, and that sort of risks and rewards are things that would be distributed within the community such that it makes sense for people to work together.
Yes.
And the implication here from Treetop Flyer is that people who have fewer resources are oftentimes the ones for whom solidarity and pooling resources is the primary way to exercise political power, because it might be the only way to exercise political power. You know, in the US, we have this chant, the people united will never be defeated. Well, it's because they don't have big money for big lawyers. So you've got what do you have? Well, we've got we the people, Exactly. And I think that's a lesson from social movement and sort of organizing or labor organizing or whatever, but it applies to any kind of political mobilization, which is, how do the resources that you have at hand help you? And if some of the resources that one has at hand, which is essentially, middle-class folks who don't worry about going it alone, then that creates, Sean, as you're pointing out, risks for everybody, possibly without a sense of concern from whoever's doing it. I'm just riffing here, but that's pulling together some things we're talking about from the chat.
Yeah, and thank you for pulling it out the chat. And Treetop Flyer is saying thank you for getting his point, because it's always difficult to try and put a point across like that, and it sometimes not be taken the wrong way. So no, thank you for that, Austin. It's and thank you for expanding on it. And it is an issue because we do have organisations here in the UK, across Europe, and in America who are large organisations on behalf of drone flyers, and you pay your yearly sub to, etc., and they will hopefully stand up for you. The problem I find is that whenever a body or whenever that kind of thing gets to a certain size, it becomes more about running that body than actually any kind of real activism. And turning a, certainly if you went by YouTube channels and the audience reaction from YouTube channels, there seems to be an awful lot of desire out there to get a control of drone regulation and to have our voices as the people using these devices heard, but there never seems to be that true connect to motivate that. We did actually have just before COVID, there was a physical demonstration outside of the FAA, which was actually fairly well attended. A lot of FPV flyers in particular were motivated to go down there, and it was a really nice thing to see. But we don't see enough of that, and instead we do have too many conversations about the non-compliance side of things, which perhaps an individual sees that as something in their individual control. Of course, that I as an individual can just decide not to comply with that law, whereas actually trying to get connected with enough tens of thousands of people to have any kind of impact is a very difficult thing. So
I think I've not had this conversation before, because it really does draw on questions about how to organize interests such that they get reflected in policy. And I think that this in-person, I mean, the folks who are regulating drones, for example, are the same people who are regulating everything else. And sort of are how does he say, vulnerable to, but are amenable to the same sorts of arguments, pressures, etc., as for any policy. And so then all of a sudden the question is, like, what constituency cares about this? And I think, if it's only a handful of folks who send in letters to their local representative, then that's one thing. But it's people who are actually willing to put in the time to show up and organize an event, that's another. The challenge here is, I'm out over my skis here, because I'm not, like, I don't know this community as well.
Yeah.
But if it's a lobbying bodies are good at, like, taking other people to restaurants and then showing them reports. They're not bad, but that's what they're good at. They're a little less, they do less well at mobilizing folks to turn out in front of, or like at 8 a.m. all across, at every single representative office that we're targeting because they're part of particular committees in the US, UK, and elsewhere, we're going to be showing up. And then we're going to send out this thing that shows like 50 different, like Zoom style, this is us in every one of these places, and then share that back with everybody. That's not the kind of thing that lobbyist groups or professional associations and societies are really optimized for. And we don't tend in those places to hire the people who then think like kind of a little bit scrappier and a little bit crazier, frankly. Yes. But sometimes that's what's needed to get policymakers' attention. And I feel like lobbyists are good if you know exactly what you want and you can pressure the folks. But in a dynamic time that we're in right now, I think a number of different tactics might be necessary. And it might be that the politician comes in, the regulator comes into the front door and says, who are those crazy people outside? And it's the regulator, and it's the lobbyist group or a professional association that says, I know, we don't like them either. Come talk with us, right?
Yes,
that's called the radical flank effect. It's a political move that essentially says, maybe they'll talk to you if they think I'm crazy, but we're part of the same team. They're like, keep me away from that guy, Austin. He's crazy. You seem sane. Can you tell me what you would do? And then you throw your ideas out there, which maybe I agree with and I'm willing to concede to. And I've agreed to get arrested in my earlier story. Why am I always the fall guy? I'm realizing this story. I'm always the fall guy. Got arrested earlier. Now I'm the guy
to take
the
fall an awful lot here.
But maybe that's what's necessary, is to help them see that there's a range of perspectives, but that the one being offered by the professional association is the reasonable one.
Indeed, and we do have there is a creator called XJet who is down in New Zealand, and he's having an ongoing battle with the New Zealand CAA, his local regulator, and he's very much talks of non-compliance and that type of thing, and he is certainly activating people, because whenever he has a run-in, suddenly that regulator does get a lot of emails from his viewers and that type of thing, and of course that to me is more activism than filling out a form on a federal website, because in the US, one of the biggest things which is a fear for people is the upcoming remote ID. And now it's not remote ID in particular that is the point I'm raising, but everybody is fearful because it would effectively potentially tell anyone that wants to know with a app on their smartphone who is flying and where they're stood flying that drone. And of course, people are very fearful of that. And my issue with it is that the FAA said, okay, we want your comments on this. We would like anybody's comments, drone flyers, your auntie down the road, airline pilots, the local chef, anyone that wants to put a comment in can submit a comment to this page. And there were, I think it was over 10,000 comments submitted for their consideration. My issue with that, sorry, just to pad that out a little bit more, the reaction from the community is they don't feel that's been listened to. And my issue with that is that's not necessarily activism. That isn't protest. That is basically adhering to what they're asking for, and it gives them a way to say, we've heard all those things, but we're now but actually we've considered that, but this is still our decision. And actually, if people cut and paste the same comments they put on that website and made it more public, either writing to their congressman with the same comments, etc., or targeting a specific person publicly, as you say, within the regulator to get that profile, then that would potentially have more of an impact than 20,000 comments through the federal website.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is that. I mean, this is, here, I can't believe we were going to have this conversation we're about to say right now, but this is there's strategy and there's tactics, right? And if the big strategy is to move the needle from a policy perspective, then there's got to be a range of tactics that got brought to bear. And having those 20,000 comments is important, because that stuff enters the Federal Register and people recognize that. And I remember when this happened, I'm busy, in professor land, waving my arms around, but, and I remember I saw that and I thought, oh, good, this is this has got a groundswell of support. The question is, it can't end there. Then there's got to be folks who then say, hey, listen, what are you going to do about those 20,000 voices? Now, maybe all 20,000 weren't all for or against, but you're like, what are you going to do about those 20,000 voices? The people demand. Yes. And then it's harder to, if you just show up and say, I represent a lot of people, trust me. that's hard. But if you point to 20,000 signatures or 20,000 comments, you say, this is an open debate. We need to talk about it more. And the way we should be talking about it is, and insert, one's vision there. And so I think that these things end up being like either having like force multipliers or multiplying, sort of multiplication effects, because there are multiple tactics in a larger strategy. What I don't know, and you all can tell me, is if there's a larger strategy. Because if there's just sort of like, an effort here and an effort here, and we try something here and try something there, then in issue after issue, that works less well than a coordinated effort that essentially tries this. And if that doesn't work, we move to here. But it's not that everything is successful and it's all a well-orchestrated plan, but that things actually have a larger rationale, a larger strategy, points where like this doesn't work, we go that direction. And if that happens, then it's easier to say, what do we do after we get those signatures? We push for the signatures, and what's after the signatures? Well, that's when we have this, whatever wave 2 is.
Yes,
so
no, indeed.
I should have ended that with a question, because that's really something I didn't know about. It's like, what happens when we have 20,000 signatures?
Yeah, indeed, exactly. But yes, it is very disjointed at the moment, and I think. There also starts to become, because regulations have changed so dramatically for drone use, there does start to become a little bit of giving up the fight as well, of course, where people start to back off, which is always a shame to see, but understandable as well, for sure. Just very, very quickly, thank you, Mark Lum, for your £5 super chat. A late fee? How dare you be late? That's it. You're off the list. You're off the Christmas card list. Johnny Mac 26, thank you for your £5 super chat as well. And Mike Drennan for a $5 super chat. Hi Mike, great to see you. He says, great show and excellent conversation. Cheers to Austin. I'd buy you a pint if I could. And he's used one of the little members only beer emojis there. So
I will drink that pint. I will drink that pint as soon as we get off this call. I promise you.
Indeed. And that's one of the things, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on as a guest tonight, and it really is to show people in the drone community that there is an academic voice out there, as it were, and experience that is involved in drones, and actually, if you start going and turning over stones, etc., even locally at your local universities, etc., you'd be surprised at the resources that you might find as far as being able to put a voice to the concern that's out there. There is a wider. There is a wider academia ready to help, as it were. We just need to try and get ourselves connected with them, because of course these people know activism, and they really know how to get things done, which is so important. So yes, Stephen, do you have anything else?
No,
sorry for talking so long there, Stephen.
No, yeah, you it's quite.
I always do it.
I think, Austin, you do have to leave now, don't you? You. I think you have.
Yeah, I just emailed somebody and said I'm going to push it a little bit longer. I said we're having a great chat, so I've got a couple more minutes. But
okay,
yeah.
That's fine. I would just like to make things a bit more lighter in a sense. But your view on, let's say, drone photography as an art form, how do you see that, and how it's changing, the arts in a way? How do you see drone photography? Yeah,
this is a. If you had asked me what questions to ask me, I would have said, please ask me about this. So I have an undergraduate degree in photography, and that I don't do anything with, other than like fix my lights in Zoom and think like, I guess I look good enough for today. But I feel like in the book, and I put a link in the book that don't like buy the book if you want a hard copy, if you're old school like that. But the book is free. It's a free open access PDF. And so you can buy a fully licensed Creative Commons licensed book. You can download it from the link I put in here, and I'll put it in again. So in chapter, I forget what chapter it is. I wrote a whole chapter on essentially what does it mean to have cameras in new places? And it's kind of a conversation about drone photography, but it really, again, like asks bigger questions about what does all of this mean? And so I start playing around with what this means, not for photography, but what does it mean for art? Like, where can art be? And, right. And this is like, there's this whole debate right now about, well, where does art belong? Well, art belongs in a museum, and who can go to a museum? Well, patrons. Well, who are patrons? Well, it's the upper crust. And who's the upper crust? Well, the people who, this is my politics, that, it's people who stole those relics from wherever they came from in the first place and then put them there for us. well, and there's a kind of a tired conversation about where art belongs, what art is. And over the last 20 years, we've had an important conversation about the role of public art. Like, what is graffiti? Is it a public menace? Is it like gang turf signage? Or is it also it's not that's never those things, but is it also a form of public art? Then the question becomes like, well, where does art belong? And if it's not in a museum, and it might actually be on the street, if you go to any Banksy exhibit and look how proud Bristol is of Banksy, then the question is like, well, then what is art and who has it and where does it belong? And I think putting cameras in the air like just completely scrambles that whole set of conversations about where art belongs, where pictures can be taken from, who gets to take pictures. I mean, so this gets a little crazy, but it got me thinking about like crop circles. And I was like, well, who are crop circles for, right? And crop circles are for people in airplanes and satellites. And why do if we have more drones in the air, more eyes in the sky, more cameras in the air, then does it change where art belongs? And so I'm just making this bit of it up, not making it up right now, but like I would like to own a whole bunch of like, art galleries on rooftops, places that aren't important enough to have a helicopter pad in London. Those places get turned into canvases. And then all of a sudden we partner with Google Earth, and they have an art gallery, which is all just fly-throughs of these canvases. Why don't we have that? And that's kind of crazy. And that's not what I'm about. But I think, and this is, and I'll stop talking and then Stephen say, oh, is that what you meant by drone photography? Because I don't think it is, but I think it's completely upended what we think, like where we think art happens, who gets to do art, what kind of photography is photography. And I'll finish with this, in art history, when photography first came around, all of these artists, all these painters were like, this isn't art because it doesn't, and they described all the things that painting does. And they said how photography doesn't do it. And photography has been this sort of like, unfortunate lesser, sort of like, junior partner with painting in the arts. And I think that's just stupid. Why? Because of cameras, there's like, and I've got a whole section on like hostility to cameras because I love cameras. So I think it's like new technology takes time to diffuse and get adopted, whole theme to this whole conversation. And I think that's true in the arts as well. Yeah. I don't know if that's what you're asking though, Stephen. Is that what you're asking?
No, it was more, I really see the urban architecture as something which is like an art form which is not greatly appreciated. But when you have a drone and you look down, when you see somewhere which is very familiar to you, which, when you go by in a bus or you go by in a car and you see the buildings, you see the areas, it's somewhere where you just take for granted. But when you see it from the air, when you look down and you see how magical, the street where you live that is so familiar to you for many, many years, 20 years or something, and you see it differently, and you start to appreciate, where you live, you start to appreciate the parks, you start to appreciate the architecture more, how land has been designed. I really love this, aspect, and I focus on this in my photography from my own hobby side, and I've had galleries and I've had people really appreciating, really seeing their home in a different way, and it's fascinating. I love seeing how people get, in a sense, emotional about that,
So I have to say that two things real quickly. The first is to Lindsay, who says we're talking about the Nazca plane in Peru. She's totally right. I've got this is an example in the book, and then I have examples of like contemporary versions of this in the book. So like you can buy the book if you want. It's for free. So go get the book because it's free, and check that out. So Lindsay, if you think that's cool, I talk about the Nazca lines. And there's contemporary efforts to do it. The Nazca lines were like before they ever thought of who was going to see it. I don't know who.
Absolutely.
There's theories that there were balloonists at the time. I love this alternative history stuff. But now we've got reasons to be doing that. And when we see stuff from a new perspective, to Stephen's point, I think it's beautiful. The question in my mind is who gets to take that, who gets to do that. And one of the coolest things in my mind is when people get to use UASs to see the space they're in for themselves for the first time. And that's what's super cool about the tech, and I think is going to allow us to layer that kind of that entire body of imagery over top of other things. Yeah. So it's got me thinking recently, because I just bought a VR headset, and it got me thinking of why can't I get in my VR headset in my car? I mean, here like where I'm sitting right now, why can't I get in this and then fly with, Stephen, your drone's footage
Yes.
through a space where you filmed it all, but then I can drive. And so I can essentially, you've 360'd everything, but then I have a joystick and I can fly everywhere you've flown, not refly your path, but fly inside all of the paths your imagery makes possible, if that makes sense. And I think that just unleashes all sorts of new potential for creative endeavors and help people to see things from a new perspective.
There is actually one company, and I forget their name at the moment, but they've actually started a service where you can actually, with an Xbox controller linked up to your PC, you can fly someone else's drone. Anywhere in the world, which is
in real time, right? The sort of drone over IP. Right. Yeah, somebody started a DOIP hunting firm when I was writing my book. It went away very quickly. They got they found a lawsuit for those folks very quickly. It was fire a live round, only in America. Fire a live round over an IP connection. Drone gun IP. Anyway.
Mind blowing.
Lots of creative minds out there.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm sorry for overshooting your schedule there.
No. This is perfect. And it's you, Stephen. I'm thinking about in Finland. And so it's you've got with your new green planet.
I deliberately tried to keep him up as late as possible. So
that's right. How can we make Stephen suffer?
Yeah,
I'm glad to have joined to be part of making Stephen suffer. I didn't know that's what we're doing, but now that I know, thanks, John, for bringing me on.
No problem.
Well, thank you for joining, Austin. It was an absolute pleasure to meet you, and hopefully we can meet again in the future.
I look forward to it. I put my Twitter handles in the chat, and happy to be of service to anybody. Reach out to me. I'm publicly available. You can Google me. My email is out there. I put my Twitter in the chat. Excellent. So I look forward to chatting with anybody in the future.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it. And we will see you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Austin. Bye-bye.
Peace.
Okay, I just need to set up a very slightly different shot there, Stephen. Bear with me, because the other shot, which is what I was actually furiously doing in the background. I was setting up another shot, but I know that it's going to have you incredibly zoomed in. So let me just do that very, very quickly.
Zoom into the plant. That's what everyone seems to be interested in.
They are, yes. Do you want to give us the update on the plant, actually? They can't hear you right now, but while I fix this. But yeah, if you want to give everybody an update, where is our plant that has become so loved? Where's it gone?
So can they hear me?
They can.
Okay, so I was in Dubai last week, and I got a photo sent to me by my wife showing me the plant, and its head was chopped off. So
was this a deliberate act? Is really what we want to know next?
It was an accident. It was an accident.
Do you believe that?
I do, because we actually just discussed this the weekend before, and I was actually showing her the chat that was there, and someone had donated money and stuff like that and whatnot. So and she was quite taken by that. So when I came back from Dubai last week, we actually went out and we bought a new plant. And that's what you see here right now. Actually, the plant is actually here. The one that is broken is here. I don't know if you can see.
No, I've clipped the.
Let me
can
just
you see the clip of the?
No. Oh. Yeah, there it's there.
Well, and we will get Stephen to tweet out the picture that he sent me of the broken plant, which caused some real upset in the Geeksvana group chat.
I will actually put a tweet out for you also.
Okay,
if you want.
So you discussed the plant.
Yes.
Your wife was aware that the plant had been mentioned on the Geeksvana channel. And so after discussion of the plant, whilst you were not in the country, had an accident.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's something's happened there. I think something has happened.
Well, I don't want to accuse Mrs. Sutton of anything at all, but
it's probably not a good
everybody
idea.
Put 1 in the chat if you think it was an accident. Put 2 in the chat if you think we need to investigate this further. We might actually have to get Mrs. Sutton on at some point to put some very difficult questions.
Yeah.
Else Meg started off with a number 2 there. So.
Definitely, I think she'll be.
Look, twos. The 2s are winning already.
The twos are on there. The 2. Oh yeah.
I have to admit, I did kind of sell it.
You did sell it. You did.
Johnny Mac is in there with the 0, which is awesome. I'm often the person that will put number 3 in the chat just because we've done that.
That was a good show. I really enjoyed that. It was good to have Austin on.
It was fascinating, and it's one of those. Austin is one of those people that I could speak to and have, whenever I want to have a 24-hour live stream for charity or something. I think Austin, I could speak to him for those full 24 hours.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
pick that brain. Yeah. It's incredible, because I love where the two worlds are meeting there. You've got the academia and drones coming together. And just the approach from the side of activism and everything else like that is absolutely fascinating. And it's always great to chat with people that enjoy drones, isn't it? Because he came from the fact that he got a drone and enjoyed using it, and that's really where it came from.
But it's more, it's more the academia. It's more the factual side, because a lot, we, and also including everyone in the chat here, and also yourself, is that we all have an opinion.
Yes.
We all, but an opinion is not necessarily fact, and I think that, listening to us and also reading the book, and I have to say that, I do recommend getting this book, because it really is fascinating. It is factual. There's a lot of facts in there, and absolutely. That is something good to, from our side, because we are opinionated, and most of the channels that we're watching.
I try to keep things fact based on Geeksvana, but yes, indeed.
No.
Opinion has to sneak in, because of course, often one of the issues is access to facts as well. And often when I'm researching a story, the research notes I have to call upon are other journalists, and then there is always an agenda and opinion, no matter how impartial that journalist is.
But that's something that you're noted for. You are noted for that. That's something
for waffling on.
No,
are you saying I waffle on? Fever Stock Photo said 42, and he is of course correct, because the answer to everything is 42.
It's 42, of course, yes. Of course, that's right. That's right.
So I really just want to close up by thanking everybody in the chat for joining us. It's been fantastic. I've really noticed over the last few months, we're really building that regular audience that come out to see us, and it's also great to see some new names in there this evening as well. So thank you everybody for joining us. I really do appreciate it. Just a very quick reminder: this evening at 7 p.m. Central, which is 1 a.m. here in the UK. So I think, Stephen, you'll be well asleep by that time.
I'll be tucked up in dreamland.
You'll almost be coming up for getting up in the morning again. It's Thursday Night Live over on Ken Herron's channel. The co-host this evening is Ashley. Ashley is back, and I also hear that Kelly Green, who has been rather unwell at the moment with, unfortunately, COVID. He's actually going to be popping on for a few minutes to say hello to everybody, which I think is good to hear that he's well enough to do that. And it's actually a Polish YouTuber. I'm going to. Are you good at pronouncing Polish names?
Is it Ewa Filmju?
Yeah.
That's worse than Finnish.
I'm wondering if it's Eva. Eva Filmju.
Yeah, it could be Eva, because it's same in Finnish.
We'll go for that.
The W is a V. Eva
Film, yes, it can be, can't it? So yes. But anyway, if you hop across to Ken Herron's channel later, his chat is already open. Actually, he does a pre-show chat. So as I say, thank you very much everyone for joining us. Stephen, we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time again.
Yes, you will.
And our next show, which is on our next show together, obviously myself and Lib are live next Thursday on the 10th for the drone show. But on the next Drones and Tech show on the 17th, we're going to have a little bit of a review of the year, aren't we? Which is going to be quite interesting to have a look at some of the biggest news stories that we've covered, and some of the drone releases, etc. So I'm looking forward to that.
It's going to be a very, 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 very busy night.
Yeah, very busy night. Very good
busy
night.
Night. I will be in the Middle East.
You will. You'll be in sunny Dubai.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll be there for 2 months. I'll be doing all my shows for the next 2 months.
Is that in response to public opinion in Finland, or are you choosing to go to the Middle East?
I'm choosing to go there.
Okay, so you're not being exiled from Finland or anything, or about owning bad trees or anything, or no?
This tree's lovely.
That tree is wonderful. Yes, I think I still suspect something, but there we go.
I'll have a conversation tomorrow morning about this. I'll have
Fact find. Could you video it as well, please, so we can play it out on the show next time? Could you imagine that conversation? Well, can I talk to you about the tree? Do you mind if I record this? And it's like, okay, Mrs. Sutton then completely reanalyzes your entire relationship in 1 second. Yeah,
and everyone on the channel can suddenly learn swearing words in Finnish. Yes,
indeed.
That would be great.
Yes, it would be highly educational. Wonderful. Yes. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time on Geeksvana Live, which is Thursday next week at 9 p.m. UK, 4 p.m. Eastern. Bye-bye.